I found out that adulthood was just as awful as they say. At 25, I had my taste of being an adult, but nothing compared to dealing with a tow truck company after a very small accident. It was just a fender bender, but they wouldn't release it back to me without a few $1,000s. They stole it, and they were somehow allowed to. Adulthood became known to me as screwing people legally and without remorse or justice for the screwed. This was so typical of all of my experiences so far. After losing my car, I took up bicycling as a means to get around Philadelphia. This was pretty easy since most places I needed to get to were within 3 miles. But then I discovered a paved trail along the Schuylkill River and one day decided to explore it by bike. Though it was crowded with joggers, it was so lush and smelled of earth. I had found a little secret beneath the underpass. Pretty soon, all of my free time consisted of bicycling. I learned to push through the pain of climbing up real hills for the first time, though I cried halfway up my first. I started overnight camping, first at a place 40 miles outside of the city, then all 90 miles to the Jersey Shore. I bought a small, lightweight tent and got used to scouting out the hidden places no one pays much attention to where I could pitch my tent. It was awesome. I was having a hard time with life's disappointments, one of which was not taking vacations. I had been working 2 or more jobs since I was 14, going to school, and with just a week of time off if I was lucky. There was never enough time to go anywhere to actually unwind. If I could find the time and money, I knew it would end up being a rushed few days filled with as much activity as I could cram in. My grant-funded position was ending, and I wanted out. Out of the city, out of the country, anywhere but here. Forget all of this. I had some exploring to do. With nearly a year to save up and get everything in order, I moved all of my things out of my apartment and got rid of everything I owned save for 2 boxes I stashed with my parents and what I could fit into the 5 bags that saddled my bike. Her name was Antoinette. I can't tell you why. She just called her name out to me during one of our early rides when I was soaring down a hill and I couldn't believe I had made it that far, my feet planted on the pedals, and I was one with the bike. She and I were ready for a journey from Philadelphia to San Diego. I chose San Diego where I planned to settle down since I knew a few people there that had always been drawn to, and I had always been drawn to the West Coast. But I was open to anything happening to take me anywhere. Day 1. It was still quite dark. I was all geared up with 2 sets of bicycling clothes, a laptop, a huge sleeping bag wrapped up in a garbage bag, and an early GPS, since it was 2009 and cell phones were not all that smart yet. I had a small cooking pot and a stove made out of a soda can. I had a little purple plastic device that looked like a man's sports cup protector. Yeah, a little like that, and it helped me pee while I was standing on the side of the road so I wouldn't have to find a bush with prickly plants to hide behind every time I needed to pee. Embarking from Philadelphia, I crashed on day 1. Fearful of the amount of traffic, I rushed to get off of this bridge that crossed into Delaware. My rear tire got caught on the metal groove of the bridge and sent me flying. I ended up with bunches of scrapes, and when I tried to roll my bicycle, I thought it was trash because it wobbled so much. Walking with it for a bit, I realized it was me who was wobbling. I was in a weird area where there was nothing but road, but I stumbled up to a hotel. The woman at the front desk rushed me into the bathroom with a first aid kit. She helped to clean the gravel from my arms and knees since I was a little out of it. If it wasn't for her, the rest of this trip probably wouldn't have happened. This woman thought what I was doing was bonkers, especially when I told her I was continuing right away. She shared the reactions of most people I knew before I left on this trip, that I was going to be get hit by cars on the daily, mauled by bears, murdered by kidnapping rapists who would only trade me for high-quality drugs, and similar fear-filled nightmare situations. It was funny to me how they would all go right for the worst-case scenario. This just made me feel even more like I had to do it. Sure, any of those things could happen, but daily life is no different. I can be afraid of all of those things staying in one place. I needed to do this to prove to myself that life is not always about the tow truck companies of the world stealing my transportation, and even more, I needed a real vacation. I needed to come up for air. And if I died doing it, then that seemed like a better way out than feeling stuck and miserable and living only through the stories that I have heard. What struck me the most and drew me to the idea of this adventure was my belief that, when given the opportunity, most people really do want to help. This is also something I needed to prove. Of course, I was pampered by friends that I got to stay with, offered showers and shared meals and entertainment. But it was the total strangers who moments before never knew I existed, those who would fear me or feel cautious towards me, well, they opened up to me just after a few minutes of talking with me. I felt like I had hacked into something primal in people, testing their innate fear radar and then switching it off. I would stand outside of a gas station to eat a sandwich while my phone charged, and I could see the stares of people. And I would think, if you think I'm weird now, wait until you smell me. Though I hardly ever went a few days without a shower. I would roll into small towns I traveled through, sometimes to a library or a fire station, and ask for suggestions on where I could stay, which sometimes led to people inviting me into their homes, offering me a meal, and a chance to do some laundry. I knocked on doors when I was too far in between towns to ask for water and directions, and sometimes also left with snacks and great tips on where to get fresh vegetables, or was invited to pitch my tent in their yard, or sometimes a room to sleep in. Once I was stranded on the side of the road fixing not one, but 2 flat tires, and a Texas Angel pulled over in a pickup looking like jolly old St. Nick in suspenders. He eased my fears that his fellow Texans had started to seep into me about the fire ants that would lick my bones clean, scorpions that would sting me, rattlesnakes that would strike at me, and feral hogs, which I had just encountered the previous night where I camped in a secluded dirt patch, all curled up in my sleeping bag reading Lord of the Flies. I could hear them sniffing and grunting around my tent, and I had heard some doozies about how dangerous they were. But they only had my heart pounding for 30 minutes or so before they found nothing of interest in my camp setup. My suspended Texas Angel confirmed what I had already discovered, that they don't scare unless they have a reason to. A real testament to the theme of my trip, that by nature most of us don't need to feel threatened as often as we do, so that we can have a better grip on what to do when the real danger confronts us. I met real cowboys and helped feed them a grand meal when I stopped at a tiny rundown welcome center after I crossed over into New Mexico. It was 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and they had just finished their day of work transporting calves being weaned from their mothers. I met hunters who offered me a trailer to stay in after one of them I had met outside of a diner had learned I was not allowed to sleep at the local campsite because I was not inside of an RV. I learned about rails to trails, abandoned railways converted to pavement paths, just like on the Schuylkill River in Philadelphia. Those were some of my favorite routes, a break from the more well-traveled, terrifying, windy, and narrow uphill roads that I shared with coal trucks, at times chased by dogs that would only let me be when I pulled out my pepper spray. No, the rails to trails were lush, full of chipmunks, fuzzy caterpillars, turtles, and babbling brooks. I mean, unbelievable. Like scenes that came right off the scream of Bambi. The Katy Trail took me across the state of Missouri, following some of the actual routes that Lewis and Clark took way back when. I rolled through the hills of the last prairie plains left in the country, going south through Kansas, which had flowers and haunting bogs and fields of hissing deer. Yes, I learned that deer hiss. History never meant more to me than it ever had reading old textbooks that didn't even have good pictures. That's not to say that I didn't have my share of problems. I was pulled over by a cop who had been notified that there was a teenage runaway. I encountered more cops one night outside of a place called Cheat Lake, where the sun was setting and this lake town had no tucked away places, so I set up on the rear porch of an abandoned squatter house. I was reading a Rolling Stone magazine inside my tent when 2 flashlights started to shine. I heard a radio and knew. A barking dog had alerted their neighbor who had called 911 on me. But just like in most of my previous encounters, once I told them what I was doing, and they believed me, they eased up and left me be. I was once again a threat no more, and instead, folks wanted to help me get 1 mile closer to San Diego. I was living the dream, and people wanted to be part of that in the little ways they could. 1 free ice cream cone from Dairy Queen at a time. 1 ride to the Walmart for a tool to help fix a problem with Antoinette. 1 person to point me back to the road I was looking for. Another to buy me a cup of coffee on a cold morning. 1 more person to help me find shelter or share their own stories of loss and regret or adventures they had taken and how I was reviving something in them that they had nearly forgotten. Who knew getting a car towed would be so life-changing for me? I rode 3,346 miles through 13 states over 78 days. I left in early September so I would get 1 last gorgeous autumn under my belt before I transplanted in San Diego, since I heard the sun never quits and seasons are not a thing. I had a real fresh start. It has now been a decade since I arrived in San Diego. The journey transformed me and helped to show me that people control their feelings and their situations, and all of the excuses that we make end up being roadblocks to our own happiness. I may have been by myself, but with the support of the people I met along the way, I was never on my own.
that was Carrie Stemridge.